Coming up on Theater Talk.
On a night like this, I start to wonder what life is all about.
And I always say two heads are better than one to figure it out.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins, and here with me is my guest co-host, Jessie Green, co-chief theater critic of the New York Times, and we are so delighted to be focusing right now on the wonderful revival of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel at the Imperial Theater. We are joined by Billy Bigelow, Joshua Henry, Jessie Mueller, Julie Jordan, both Tony nominees this season, and Andy Einhorn, the musical supervisor of the production.
And we're clearly at the best piano bar in New York. Right? That's right. So feel free to order some drinks.
Yes, tip your wait staff.
We wanted to focus today on the famous scene that concludes with the most famous song from the show, If I Loved You. But we're not, spoiler alert, we're probably not going to focus on the song so much itself as the incredible construction of this rather long scene. Actually, how long is the whole scene?
It's around 9 minutes.
Wow.
It's quite a monolithic piece of music. I mean, it's Shakespearean in its construction, as well as just the sort of heft and weight of how much time is given to this particular beat in the show.
You say monolithic, and yet one of the fascinating things about the construction, which you don't find a lot in Rodgers' music, maybe in South Pacific to some extent, and in Hammerstein's way of shaping the scene, is that it is built around lots of different cells,
Yes.
musical and also emotional, and we're going to talk about and sample some of each of those. Where does it begin? Where do you feel? Where does this scene actually start? What is the setup? What has just happened?
Two young mill workers go out for a night on the town, basically, and we go to the carousel that's visiting, and we see the barker, Billy Bigelow, and we have a little altercation with the lady that owns the carousel. She basically chases us out. So this scene happens almost directly after we've been chased out of the woods by Mrs. Mullen. All of a sudden, Billy shows up and he says, all right, let's hang out. Which of you would like to stay with me?
And Julie is the one that emerges and decides that she wants to stay.
Let me
And we know that, this is trouble, 'cause she's
Well, you've just lost your job.
I've just lost
Spoiler
my
alert.
job. And
I've
then-
basically lost my job because I said I'm going to stay.
Yeah.
And at that time, I would have. We talk about it in the scene. If I work at this mill, I also live there in the boarding house. So if I don't get home by the time the doors are closed, I'm out of a job. I'm out of a place to live. So the stakes are very high for everyone, but also very exciting.
So the beginning is kind of flirtatious. It's maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like the initial flirtation is coming from Billy. At least in terms of the dialogue. I don't know what's going on in terms of the emotion.
Yeah, I think Billy is on the prowl, so to speak. I mean, he's
Yeah.
Always.
yeah. You know, he steps away from the carousel, and so on a night like this, we're seeing what we can sort of get away with.
And don't you think Billy's done this before, whereas
For
Julie
sure.
Jordan has not?
For sure.
Yes.
Well, so let's hear the bit of music and the introduction to this so-called bench scene in which we hear the beginning of this flirtation.
Tell me something. Ain't you scared of me? I mean, after what the cop said about me taking money from girls?
Oh, I ain't scared.
And your name? Julie. Julie something.
Julie Jordan.
You're a queer one, Julie Jordan. Ain't you sorry that you didn't run away? You can still go if you wanna.
I reckon that I care to choose to stay. You couldn't take my money if I didn't have any, and I don't have a penny, that's true. And if I did have money, you couldn't take any, 'cause you'd ask and I'd give it to you.
You're a queer one, Julie Jordan. Ain't you ever have a fella you give money to?
No.
Ain't you ever had a fella at all? Well, you must have had a fella you went walking with.
Yes.
Where you walk?
No especial I recall.
In the woods.
No.
On a beach.
No.
Did you love him?
No. Never loved no one. I told you that.
You're a funny kid. You want to go into town and dance, maybe, or?
No, I have to be careful.
Of what?
My character. You see, I'm never going to marry. I'm never going to marry. If I was going to marry, I wouldn't have to be such a stickler. But I'm never going to marry, and a girl who don't marry has got to be much more particular.
So let's start at the beginning of that. You're a queer one, Julie Jordan. That's not the first time we've heard that phrase
Correct.
musically or lyrically in the show. It was sung earlier by another character.
Yeah, the character Carrie Pipperidge. So Julie's best friend, the two girls that are sort of in the woods together, being like, what do we do?
So that's one of the motifs that we were talking about that we hear. But that section that you just sang has 3 or 4 different cells that will recur again in the song. Maybe, Andy, you can speak to how Rodgers did the job of fitting them together so that they don't sound like 10 different things, but one thing.
Actually, I think there was a real definite homage to the operetta tradition in the construction of a lot of the pieces in this show, because where something like South Pacific or Sound of Music, you saw a definite 32-bar song structure, and this is actually defying that, especially in this intro. And the musical geek in me is so fascinated by this very beginning of the section, because interestingly he keeps actually raising the tension through these characters flirting with one another actually by raising the key.
Yeah.
So actually you have that first key that they're sitting in G major, and then as each one of them raise one another, it ends up going up a half step until a certain point where what I love about Julie is she keeps cadencing the phrases, and so I think there's a really
Can you demonstrate kind of what cadencing
Yeah,
means?
well, cadence-
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
I
something we
think,
talked
for
about in
instance,
rehearsal.
you know, when he sings, you can still go if you wanna. She sings, I reckon that I care to choose to stay.
brings it back.
Putting a button on
Yeah.
it. But she's actually, it's a rather sort of classical, almost Mozartian tradition
Right.
to say, I'm gonna go and 2, 5, 1, and put this button on it so that it gives it a sense of actually grounding so that she can go on with her thought.
One of the other things I love in this, while we're getting all geeky techy, is there's a wonderful kind of worm turn figure, a chromatic thing that goes on that like really literally ratchets up the tension on those lines like,
Yeah, when he sings that.
have you never had a fella you...
Julie Jordan, ain't you ever had a fella you give money to?
No, shoot
And
it
I
down.
think what's really interesting is it's that sort of sinewy nature
Yeah.
of really getting under her skin.
And does the music help you find what's going on?
It really
at that moment?
informs the flirtation there, you know,
Right.
the real question there. I mean, no one really wants to give away their hand,
Right.
you know, so what are you about? And that chromatic
Yeah.
question in the music really informs what I have to do, what
I think it also
really-
ends in a very fascinating way, because once you've asked the 3 questions, you say in the woods, on a beach, did you love him? You get one more iteration, which allows her to go to her next beat by going, never loved no one, I told you that. So you're already ready for the next beat. So it's this very interplay between the sort of how the dialogue and the music are coming in and out of one another, and they're also weaving together.
We're going to maybe skip a little here. There's one of the motifs coming up, also heard earlier in the show, brings us into the question of what would it be like if you fell in love. This is, and I've always thought of this as the sound of the loom.
It is. It's that
That spinning, that
repetitive,
whirring.
swirling figure.
Can you
Sure, it's this.
favor us with it?
It's this idea of this sort of. It's musically painting the sound of the loom.
And can we hear
Absolutely.
what Julie is
The
singing?
little section that goes into the
Yes,
chirp.
Yeah.
When I worked in the mill, weaving at the loom, I gaze absent-minded at the roof. And half the time the shuttle would tangle in the threads, and the warp would get mixed with the woof. If I loved you.
But you don't.
She says, no, I don't.
So we get the name of the song,
Yeah, right? You set the idea up.
set
What's
the idea
happening
up,
in the
then
music?
seem to pull back from it,
Yeah.
and then we get a chorus.
The delight in the trick is sort of, for me, to sort of like slip it in and not feel like you're announcing a song.
So let's hear that.
But somehow I I can see just exactly how I'd be if I loved you. Time and again I would try to say all I'd want you to know. If I loved you, words wouldn't come in an easy way. Round in circles I'd go, longing to tell you, but afraid and shy. I'd let my golden chances pass me by. Soon you'd leave me, off you'd go in the mist of day, never, never to know.
And I think you kind of, she ends it on a, oh God,
Oh.
I said too much. You know? She kind of goes, oh wait, I mean, if I loved you. One of the things Jack O'Brien was so helpful with in rehearsal is with me, and we were talking about Julie, and he just kept talking about the immediacy of her. She's so kind of like right there. And it's interesting, the thing I also love about this scene is just how frank they are with each other. They're strangers, and they have so much to risk, so much, I mean, possibly so much to gain, but also maybe so much to lose, but they're just so open with each other, sort of shockingly so, and the things that they say to one another. And then, like we were saying, this lyric gets introduced about if I love you, this idea, and she says what she thinks it would be like, and then Billy takes on that lyric, and to me it's just that wonderful moment of you look at someone and you go, oh my God, I'm not alone. Like, you think about it the way I kind of think about it. Maybe I'm not crazy.
And that is really underlined after you sing your chorus. We then get more of the operetta development of the scene using, again, many of these same cells with one big additional one, this time mostly from Billy's point of view.
This is actually one of my favorite parts of the bench scene when we get this unlocking of who Billy is, sort of when we realize that Billy's actually a poet inside, and it goes to that great Hammerstein place where the imagery becomes about the sky and the sea and how we're all meeting together. But I think it's a really interesting, very worldly view for a character that up to this point we've not seen anything like this out of him.
Well, let's recall that it is drawn from a play by Franz Mueller that is very cosmic and philosophical, and beautifully condensed into what this 32-bar section here, which we'll hear.
You can't hear a sound, not the turn of a leaf, nor the fall of a wave hitting the sand. The tide's creeping up on the beach like a thief, afraid to be caught stealing the land. On a night like this, I start to wonder what life is all about.
And I always say two heads are better than one to figure it out.
So, and we heard you again cadencing.
Exactly.
Right before this, we get a figure. Right before the ba-da-ba-da-bum-bum.
Oh, yes.
That becomes important later.
Yes.
Jumping ahead, we go through, Billy has that cell and a few more that are also based on the other, and then we get to the loom theme again, only now from your point of view with a different story of what love would be, and the main chorus, second chorus of the song. So let's hear the final chorus.
But somehow I can see just exactly how I'd be if I loved you. Time and again I would try to say all I'd want you to know. If I loved you, words wouldn't come in an easy way. Round in circles I'd go, longing to tell you, but afraid and shy. I'd let my golden chances pass me by. Soon you'd leave me, off you would go in the mist of day, never, never to know I loved you. If I loved you.
Well, and there's not as
I get to listen to that every night. Just and everything.
That was so astonishingly wonderful. I can't begin to react. Which
She's
is
done. She's
overwhelming.
like,
one quick final question. Is it possible, can you ever get tired of singing that?
No.
No, I think
It's
maybe
great. It feels
physically,
like-
but I don't think emotionally. No.
It's interesting how
like
many
soaring.
times this song ends up appearing throughout the show in the ballet,
Yeah.
and then in the reprise at the end, and yet it just seems to continue to strike this great emotional chord, pun intended.
Yeah, right. It's
but
this
it
mighty
speaks
theme
from the
that
heart.
keeps coming back.
Absolutely.
And no, I mean, for me as a singer and an actor, it's such a blessing to have stuff like this because you can continue to dig and find things and you know what I mean. And when you get to do something like this and play off of someone and play off of someone like Josh, that's half the fun of it. It's like, what's going to happen tonight? You know?
It's different every night.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you all so much for taking of your time to come over here today and do this.
And
for us.
perform tonight.
Thank you.
Perform tonight. Jessie Mueller, back again. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
Joshua
us.
Henry and Andy Einhorn, thank you so much. Jessie Green,
Thank you,
so
Susan.
much.
Thank you.
Can't get better than that. Joining me now is my co-host Jan Simpson of Broadway Radio, and we're so happy to be joined by director George C. Wolfe, who has helmed the most remarkable and wonderful production of The Iceman Cometh, which is now on Broadway. George, congratulations
Thank
on
you
this
very much.
production.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Stars Denzel Washington
Yes.
in the lead role. A wonderful cast you've
Extraordinary
assembled.
cast of people.
Do you think everybody out there in our audience knows this play, or you have to tell them about it?
I'll tell them a little bit about
All
it.
right.
It's set in this bar that's run by Harry Hope. It's all these people live there. It's set in 1912, and all these people are waiting around for Hickey to show up because once or twice a year he shows up with money and he buys drinks for all these people, and they're all derelict and bums and with very limited means. And they assume that when he shows up this time, it's going to be just like it is, singing and laughing and jokes and being drunk forever and ever. And then he shows up and he decides he's going to save them. And he's going to save them and expose them to the lies and the illusions and the pipe dreams that have haunted them their entire lives.
How much of this play do you feel is about alcoholism? And how much of this play, because they're all a bunch of drunks.
Yes.
And how much of this play is about people masking their illusions?
I think it's without question about people masking their illusions.
All right.
And the function that alcohol plays is that it numbs you from the rage that you feel inside. And so what ends up happening when Hickey shows up and starts to expose them to themselves, their fear sets in and they stop drinking. And as a result, all these truths and anger and frustrations and loss and defeat begins to come to the surface. So to me, the play is liquor is the great numbing impact on your spirit, but it's really about that balance of truth and lies and what proportion is healthy and what proportion drags you under.
This play is famous for being very long, but your production really moves quite fleetly. Part of that is your direction, but part of it is that you made some cuts.
I don't call them cuts, I call them snippets. But it's like, just,
Okay.
I wanted to create an incredibly muscular production. I wanted to create one that had a very assaultive energy, assaultive with comedy, assaultive with pain, assaultive with pathos, a physically very aggressive production. Because once again, the play begins and they're looking for the liquor and he shows up and he provides them with the liquor, but they're unsettled. So everything, every single thing that is unresolved about them is coming to the surface. And when that process is happening, that's not a casual process. It brings out a kind of rawness, a desperation, an anger, and a rage, and a sense of violation. And so to me, that was a strong clue as to what the play was about. And also one of the things that's really interesting to me, O'Neill, all of his earlier work, he was experimenting with form.
Yes.
He was doing very stylized plays. He was doing very, very epic plays. And then there's this assumption that therefore he then matured and then wrote ICEMAN COMETH and Long Day's Journey in the Night. And I disagree with that violently. I think that every single play that he ever wrote stylistically is present in ICEMAN COMETH. So to me, all of those became really interesting rhythms and dynamics, which I wanted to explore and put inside of ICEMAN COMETH, not create a reverential production, but one that had a vibrancy and an intensity of the young man that he was in 1912.
When this play first opened, what 1946?
Yes.
It was a failure in many senses, and people said, for one thing, it's too long and too dark, too depressing, right after World War II. But now, don't you think it's in sync with our times?
Well, exactly.
Very much so?
One of the things that I think is so vital and so important about the play, it's what do you hold on to when hope appears to be vanishing? And we're all asking those questions.
Yeah.
We're all asking, and also, what, as I said earlier, what degree of truth and lies do we each need to allow ourselves to wake up each morning to go forward? Because we all do that balancing act every single day of our lives. If there's too much truth, it can be startling and overwhelming. If it's too much lies, we're disconnected from reality.
Now, I have to ask you all, Denzel, African-American man, playing this part that was obviously written for a white man, as did James Earl Jones, and that means nothing. But then in there's the other character,
Joe Mott.
Yes, Joe, who is being racially assaulted. And to me, it's just, well, that's the way it's cast. But is there any other thinking on you both?
Well, there was a very specific thinking,
Yeah.
just in the sense that to me, New York, still to this day, but back then, it's a series of tribes. And so, so racial and ethnic slurs are hurled at each other. Hickey is showing up with means, with money. He is of the world. Nobody's going to waste time attacking him when he's providing them with money and liquor. And also, there's an interesting story that Joe Mott, the character, tells, played by the brilliant Michael Potts, where he said when he tried to open up his saloon, he asked Harry Hope to sign a letter saying that he was white.
Yeah.
Now, in that connotation, he means white in the sense that you're going to play with us economically. You're going to bribe the police force so that therefore we won't put you out of business, right? So one of the things that I love about the play, which is incredibly sophisticated for Neil's thinking, he's viewing white not as a definition of race, but as a means of playing along with the system. So if you give, you will get, which is an incredibly sophisticated, it gets a big laugh, but incredibly sophisticated thought process when you think about this character is saying this in 1912,
Yes.
written by a playwright who wrote it in 1944.
Also, how prescient he was about addiction
Yes.
and alcoholism and how it was going to take us. I mean, obviously it was bringing people down when he wrote it.
Well, it certainly afflicted
Yeah.
his family.
It's so interesting that Hickey talks about his father, and one of the things that Denzel was we would talk a lot about. He talks about his father, but he doesn't mention the mother, whereas Parrott, his storyline is nothing but about his mother. Because I think he was building up the courage to write about his mother in Long Day's Journey.
Is this your first O'Neill play?
Yes.
Is O'Neill a playwright that had interested you before?
Absolutely 100% no. And now I am completely and totally in love, because one of the things that he does so brilliantly is when you read it, you don't realize how astonishing he's captured American vernacular, how astonishing he's captured New York vernacular. The rhythm of his language is so brilliant and smart and incisive and challenging and demanding and full of vibrancy and life and need. And so, I would read it and I would just go, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's hard, it's rough. Yeah, I get it. But now you read it, and when you start to animate it, you realize how thrilling it is. It's intimate, it's vaudevillian, it's epic, it's surreal, all of that. And he's playing with all these extraordinary rhythms. So, I went from going, yeah, O'Neill, to, oh my God, can I go on another date? You know what I mean? He is a great, great American writer.
It truly is a great American play. It's now at the Jacobs Theater. George C. Wolfe, you've very justifiably been nominated for a Tony Award for this, along with Denzel Washington.
And David Morse.
And David Morse.
And the designers, every single
designers.
designer.
Wonderful.
Yes.
It's wonderful. All right. Thank you so much, Jen Simpson. A pleasure as always. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Dinelli Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you,